Yeah, folks, we've got some new Marvel Snap cards to discuss, and it's a lot of sick dragon themed cards. Looks like the entire season for January is basically going to be all about dragon stuff, and that means we're getting some crazy big heavy hitters like the card behind me. Also just like some stuff that could be entirely new archetypes. All in all, some pretty crazy designs, and I think some real powerhouse potential as well. Just do keep in mind, as always, these are data mined cards. That means these are not the final versions. Very often we see small tweaks to numbers here and there from this stage. Usually effects stay pretty close to this, but you know, technically anything could still change before these cards are officially released. That said, let's go ahead and take a look at these, because I think some of these are going to be really, really awesome, including our first fella here, Fin Fang Foom. Which, number one, it's nice to get a name and character that I recognize as a more casual Marvel guy. This is still a name I know and love. So pretty cool to see Fin Fang Foom finally making his way into Marvel Snap. He is a 7/12, which I love that he's 7 cost card. I like more and more 7 cost cards entering the game. And this really powerful on reveal, gain the power of front row enemy cards here, which I think can actually be a pretty significant amount of power. Like, yes, of course, sometimes you'll have stuff in the front row that's like a 2 power card and a 3 power card, because it's, you know, things they just played early. But even in that example, that's 5 power total, which makes Fin Fang Foom a 17 power card, which, you know, doesn't compete with like Infinite necessarily, but is still a really big individual threat that can kind of single-handedly contest a location. Obviously, he's 7 costs, so, you know, if you wanted to play him normally, you'd need to ramp into that 7 energy somehow. I, number one, don't think that's actually that crazy, but also I think he is an absolute perfect fit for something like a Hela deck, where you just need cards in those various cost slots, because she's looking at unique costs when she's resummoning those. Also makes him an easier target for something like Lady Sif to discard, and he's bigger than the current cards in those slots, like Death at 8 and Scar at 7. You know, suddenly your Scar becoming a 17 plus power card or whatever in a Hela deck sounds like a huge upgrade. Like, that's just an awesome fit for Hela, which is actually still kind of a sleeper competitive deck right now that people aren't playing all that much. And 17 was like the kind of weak example. I mean, technically he could gain 0, right, if it landed in an empty spot, but that means you're winning there anyway. Even if they only had 1 card, you know, maybe he's a 14, 15 power card. Other instances, though, there are going to be plenty of decks that have 10 plus power down easily in those first 2 spots in a given location, because, you know, maybe they played like a 3 power card and then later followed up with like an 8 power card, and suddenly that's 11 power that Fin Fang Foom is gaining. He's 23. Sometimes it'll be like a Red Skull deck, and they've got a 14 power Red Skull in that first location, and Fin Fang Foom is an easy 26. Sometimes it's Monster Island, and they play a Red Skull next to it, and they have 24 power in that location, and Fin Fang Foom is a 36 power card. It's actually not all that hard to concoct scenarios where this guy just becomes really, really big. So I think, like, his floor is pretty solid. I think very often 15, 17, even 20 plus power on Fin Fang Foom is pretty reasonable. Sometimes he's hitting those like 30 plus numbers, which is absolutely insane and awesome and lives up to the size and grandeur of this character, which I really, really like. So I think this could just be like a big single target payoff, like we see sometimes with, say, like Galactus First Steps, that kind of card. But, you know, does demand ramp, so it's going to have at least some kind of Luna Snow or Electro or something in there to get that active. Alternatively, just a really good hit for Hela decks, just crazy good fit for Hela. So I think both of those are viable angles for this to get play. So not just like a big crazy silly number kind of card, but actually one that makes competitive sense as well. I think this is honestly looking pretty dang good, and I'm excited to say that. So next up here we have another really big dragon. This is Shou-Lao the Undying. This one is a 5/10, which actually makes this one of our like biggest 5-drops in the game already. There really aren't that many big 5-drops. You'll notice as you look around there, that's like Agamotto and Red Skull territory, and I think that's it. It's also got this on reveal, give the last character you played +2 power for each turn you played 2 or more cards, and then you'll see that parenthetical down there. It's just a marker for how many turns that is currently. So, you know, it's basically keeping track of that for you, so you don't have to remember. You'll be able to reference that and see. So, you know, it's pretty hard to play 2 cards on turn 1. Technically not impossible. You know, you got stuff like Wasp you could play down with a 1-drop, but pretty hard. I think more realistically, turn 2, 3, and 4 are where you're going to be looking to do that. 2 is still actually sometimes kind of hard to get 2 cards down because you don't always have 2 1-drops in hand. And sometimes if you did have 2 1-drops in hand, it'd be hard to have enough cards to like do that again on turn 3 and 4 because you just run out of stuff in hand. Maybe if you generate enough cards, it's possible. But what I'm getting at is like probably realistically turn 3 and 4, or maybe if you play this guy on turn 6, which is not unreasonable, then, you know, maybe turn, you know, 3, 4, and 5 would be possible to get 2 cards down. Kitty Pryde is one way to kind of, you know, juice those numbers a lot. We're going to see another Kitty Pryde support card here actually very soon. So, you know, some ways to get that more reliably, like we've seen with Thena before as a similar condition, right? Definitely not impossible. I think basically, though, your range is going to be on average about +4 or +6 total output extra out of your Shou-Lao the Undying, which when you're starting at 510 is actually still a really significant buff, right? If you basically have +4, you're already at 514 in total. That's really nice. And you can kind of spread that power out a little bit. You're not really locked in. Shou-Lao goes here, the +4 goes somewhere else. Also, of course, we have ways to magnify that +4 buff or +6 buff through other cards. For instance, you know, I was thinking about if you're playing 2 cards on turn 4, you might have Kitty Pryde plus Captain Carter. Captain Carter is your last character played. If you give Captain Carter a +4 or +6 buff, forget it, right? Like, that's absolutely incredible. And we know there are lots of other cards that can magnify buffs in powerful ways. You've got Sebastian Shaw, Scarlet Spider, etc. Some of those might work better or worse depending on the time you play Shou-Lao. But, you know, like Scarlet Spider plus Kitty Pryde on turn 5 into a Shou-Lao on turn 6. You play the Kitty Pryde again on turn 6 alongside the Shou-Lao. Maybe you've been buffing, you know, Athena the whole way. It's like, man, you're starting to talk about a lot of extra power being generated out of all this stuff. And you can put together this really cool kind of like 2 card per turn deck that does something pretty sick. So what I'm getting at here is like, I think this guy puts out numbers even without the extra magnification off those buff scalers like Captain Carter. You're talking about maybe a 514 or 516 in total output. That's crazy. The fact that it splits really nice. And sometimes you're multiplying that further. You know, maybe he's in essence a 522 or more pretty easily with the way all that shakes out. So what I'm saying is, once again, this looks good and actually has some kind of proven deck models where this could fit pretty well on top of that. So in my mind, another really good card. So I guess next up here, let's take a look at Lockheed. This is going to be another one that makes a lot of sense with Kitty Pryde as Kitty Pryde's sidekick, as I understand it. Lockheed is a 2/1 with end of turn. If you played a 1-cost card this turn, afflict an enemy card here with -2 power. So of course, if you're playing Kitty Pryde every turn, that's going to make your Lockheed go off every turn. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be played here. It just says if you played one. So you could put Lockheed somewhere else, still stack up an Angela or Zombie Scarlet Witch lane with your Kitty Pryde over and over and over again, getting multiple triggers off Kitty Pryde, but now also getting a multiple trigger off Lockheed. And that -2 power affliction can be really nice. You know, that's a net of 2 power pretty much always for you. Kind of lets you make one lane really strong off your Angela or whatever, a second lane really strong off your Lockheed, and it's like, man, Kitty Pryde is kind of getting that 2-for-1, which could be really, really nice. Obviously, some potential affliction synergies there too if you wanted to go that route and put this in some kind of affliction deck. I don't know if you necessarily need that. I think it's definitely possible. We've even seen like high evolutionary affliction that's running a bunch of 1-drops anyway, even if it's not running Kitty Pryde. You know, maybe you just slam a Sunspot, a Misty Knight, etc. Maybe you get it like a bonus -6 out of your Lockheed. That discounts your Abomination and you start feeding off that way. That's not my favorite line for this deck, but definitely a consideration anytime we talk about affliction. Ultimately, I don't think you need that because if you're playing a 1-drop alongside this, even on 3 turns, and then I think very reasonably 4 turns, because you've got turn 3, 4, 5, and 6 as great follow-ups, then you're talking about -8 power applied to the opponent's cards. That means a total point output for Lockheed of 9. 1 plus -8 is going to be a 9 total swing, which is really nice for a 2-drop. And as we've often talked, that negative power from afflictions can be even more impactful. Look at that Captain Carter example we just gave. You give Captain Carter -2, you put it in an Iron Man location, starts to multiply its negative impact even further. So ultimately, I think, you know, able to put out some pretty good numbers. has potential disruption value. It is, again, a more narrow card. It has to be played probably in a deck that's, you know, running consistent enough one drops. Maybe has to even be Kitty Pryde, honestly. But I think you can kind of get around that with some of those other decks that just, you know, Athena decks almost in general have options like that a lot. It does also say 1 cost card, not character. So any kind of skill generating, like Merlin, for instance, could be a way to enable your Lockheed pretty reliably. So not totally specific and narrow, but I think Kitty Pryde's definitely going to be the focus on this one, and then maybe a few other spots he makes sense. Affliction might also give him that little bonus to get played, but I think the power output here is very reasonable. The conditions, notable but not crazy, as long as the deck supports it. Therefore, I think that means this card is good, if not, like, I don't think he's amazing, but just good. So next up here is Dragon of the Moon. This is a 3/2 with on reveal, steal 1 power from even costed cards in all hands. So both you and your opponent's hand here, potentially feeding your Dragon of the Moon. Now, you know, stealing power from cards in your hand is not necessarily a thing that's ideal, right? You kind of go 1 for 1. But if you don't play those cards, they just stayed in hand and weren't going to get played anyway, you might not really recognize the downside of that. I guess technically you could also use that as a sort of enabler almost, where you're debuffing your cards into, say, an Ajax, or alternatively, if you're like running a Luke Cage, maybe you don't care if they get debuffed, maybe it's fine. So it could still be a net gain depending on how you work it. But ultimately, you know, if you steal, say, 3 power from your opponent's even costed cards, this becomes a 3/5 that has potentially negatively impacted their side of the board by -3. You're kind of looking at sort of an 8-point swing there. If you can net another 1 or 2 points from your side of things, you know, maybe you're talking about a 10 power total output for Dragon of the Moon. You can sort of start to see how this gets up to some pretty nice threatening power totals. Now, it is a little unreliable because, you know, how many even cards do you have in hand? I don't think you're running a deck that's all even cards or anything like that to really juice him. How many does your opponent have in hand? You know, if you play this later in the game, I could shift things around if you don't hit him on turn 3. So it's weird. This kind of lives in this space around like Scorpion and Cassandra Nova, but like also has the symmetrical side of things. So this one's throwing me for a little bit of a loop. I ultimately think like the numbers maybe here aren't quite pushed enough for this to feel like crazy good, but I like Cassandra Nova. I actually think Scorpion is sleeper good, underplayed, actually does get played in some like high Evo and affliction-y type stuff often. So I don't think it's bad at all. I wish this was maybe just like 1 point higher. I wish I had a more obvious line to squeeze this into my deck, because I don't really think it's a great Ajax card necessarily. I don't know why you want to necessarily put Luke Cage with this, and then they cost the same, which isn't necessarily a problem, but can be a little awkward. So I'm just like looking for that extra little nudge on this one, basically. I think there's potential here. I think the numbers can get good. I like Affliction. I like debuffs. All of that's nice. I'm just not totally sold quite yet, if that makes sense. All right, next up here is Dragon Lord. This is a 5/5 with on reveal, put a card from your hand here, which is a shockingly simple text line for this era of Marvel Snap. This feels like a card that is simple enough. It could have been in the game on day 1, which it's nice that we can still tap into really simple designs like that. I like that. I also think it's just really good. I actually think this has a crazy amount of potential, because the 5 power floor on this is actually really good. In other words, you know, if you pull like a 2 cost card out of hand, which is your low roll, you know, maybe that's 3 or 4 power. It's not a total disaster. You're not thrilled about, you know, developing 5/8 or 5/9, but it's not that far off rate from normal. And that's your giga low roll. And what I'm saying is the decks that are running this are actually just going to have fantastically great high rolls, where they're easily pulling 6 cost cards, maybe 7 cost Fin Fang Fooms, right? Even a 4 or 5 cost card getting pulled into play very often means, you know, you're getting 6, 8, 10 plus power pulled out of your Dragon Lord, added to the 5 at a baseline. Like, that's really good. And, you know, that doesn't account for other effects that you can maybe cheat out early. Getting your 6 drop down early can be a big play sometimes, right? So Just extra bonuses from on reveals. Like there's just a lot of really good reasons to do this, and a lot of really big cards that can reward this, and frankly a lot of really medium-sized cards that can reward this. So in the same way we've seen Jubilee cheating cards out and sometimes just hitting those crazy big hits on your Jubilees, like this is different because it's from hand instead of deck, and pulling from deck is nice because it's an extra card. Despite that, most decks don't run out of cards in hand. Like, even if you pull something from hand, you're still going to have plenty of things to play later as follow-ups. You're not going to run out of resources. You're just getting to cheat kind of, very often 5 power into play for free because it's going to be a big thing you wanted to play anyway for, again, the decks that want to do this. So, no, not every deck can just toss this in. If they have too many small things, it won't be worth it because, you need to make sure you're hitting big things reliably. But I think any deck that's just running a handful of 4, 5s, and 6s honestly might be able to work this in, especially if you have payoff, something like Odin, for instance, where Odin comes down, taps this again, and you just like single-handedly won that lane off your Dragon Lord alone. There's some risk there of overcommitment. In general, the fact that it's stacking the card here, again, kind of leads towards some overcommitment risk, but I don't think that's normally going to be a problem. Like you're going to put this in a spot where you kind of need some points and need to flip, so it's going to be fine. So, whether that's cheating out something big early, whether that's isolating your hand down in something like a dump style deck where you only have big stuff left and you use this and Dracula and whatever, and you just reliably have big, Gigantos and Infinites and Fin Fang Fooms only in hand, and you just target like that, that could be a really cool way to do this. But I don't even think you have to go that targeted on it. I think it might be fine just in like a normal ramp style deck, or just a deck that's running some big stuff. Feels like a freebie 5 power in a lot of cases to just get something big out. So I personally think this card actually looks pretty good despite its simplicity. So moving on here, it's what everyone wanted, another Shang-Chi. This time it's Shang-Chi, Master of the Rings. He is a 3/4 instead of a 4/3. Reads game start, the 10 rings starts in your hand. That is a 2-cost 0 power card, as you can see here, assuming that is correct. That does feel like something that could kind of be tweaked a lot. And then on reveal for Shang-Chi, Master of the Rings, is unlock their potential, which means you go from the top version of the card to the bottom version of the card. So it starts out with a bad text line, basically, which is end of turn, give one of your other cards here +1 power. But once you've played Shang-Chi, it upgrades and it becomes end of turn, give your other cards here +1 power. So in essence, it will buff everything at a given location, not just one thing at a given location, which can be up to 2 extra power per turn, which, when you're talking about multiple turns 3, 4, 5, and 6, may be worth actually quite a bit of extra power in the scheme of things. So one way to think about this is kind of like a reverse Thor, almost, where you start with a hammer and then you're looking for the Thor. So you're looking for the Shang-Chi to upgrade your 10 rings. Now, I will say, like, I'm not totally in love with the 10 rings. You got to spend 2 to get it into play. Let's say you've played a 1-drop on turn 1, ideally, which I think actually this is a great fit for a Wiccan deck specifically. So you might actually very reliably have Quicksilver on turn 1. You're always going to have your 10 rings on turn 2, which does allow you to cut Domino, which is actually really nice because Domino kills a draw from your deck. This does not kill a draw from your deck, so you'll actually be more likely to find the Wiccan than in current Wiccan builds. So you play Quicksilver on 1, the 10 rings on 2. That pushes your Quicksilver to 1 power already. So then, your 10 rings have kind of put out 1 total power. On turn 3, sometimes you'll draw Shang-Chi, sometimes you won't, but let's assume you commit again to that to the 10 rings location. Then, if it's Shang-Chi, you're going to be getting +2 power that turn. That takes your 10 rings up to 3 power total output. Then let's just get the dream scenario. You play Wiccan. Let's say you go ahead and commit the Wiccan in that location, right? That means now your 10 rings are going to give +3 per turn again. So that's 6 power total output, 9 power total output, 12 power total output for your 10 rings in the perfect curve scenario, assuming I did all of that math right. That means, you're going to have 12, 6 from Wiccan is 18, 4 from Shang-Chi is 22, 2 from Quicksilver is 24 total power in that location, which is presumably enough to like win that location despite your, you know, early commitment. It's still going to be a crazy amount of work for the opponent to win that. If they do, you probably win elsewhere anyway, especially because you hit your dream Wiccan curve. So what that really means is if the 10 rings is 12 total in power output and Shang-Chi's 4 total, that's kind of a 5-16 in total output, which that's not like crazy. It's pretty good. Like, you know, we just talked about, you know, I liked Shou-Lao or whatever for having 14 to 16 power, but what I'm saying is that's the perfect scenario where you fully committed and you hit Shang-Chi on turn 3. Whereas, you know, I'm saying Shou-Lao maybe doesn't require quite so much impact, right? It's not one-to-one comparisons anyway. I'm just saying, like, perfect scenario. I'm not totally in love with it necessarily. And you're not always going to hit Shang-Chi on turn 3. Sometimes the 10 rings are only going to be buffing 1 per turn for a while, maybe the whole game. And what that means really is you're going to kind of get a buff on turn 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is kind of 5 power, which, you know, 2/5 is not a disaster. That's actually better than Domino. So maybe that's fine, actually. Like, I probably sound more negative than I am, because what I'm ultimately going to tell you is this is just a straight upgrade to Wiccan decks, which is one of the best decks in the game, if not the best deck in the game at various stages. So I 100% think this is going to be played and be really good, but not necessarily because of its numbers or power output, just because of the fact that the 10 rings start in your hand. So that's fine. That's a part of the card. That's a completely valid reason to be excited about and run it for Wiccan players. So I do think it's going to get played a lot. I think it's going to be very, very, very relevant to the meta. I just don't think it's going to feel good in and of itself, if that makes sense. And it will only perhaps be great in Wiccan decks. Maybe some Swarmier decks can commit to that, or the same kind of game plan and rip it early. But I really just think this is a Wiccan card through and through. That's enough. That'll make it competitive. It doesn't need anything else. I'm just kind of, you know, assessing it in out of that context. And I think it falls much further short there. But the fact that this is just a Domino replacement that sometimes is much, much bigger than Domino on top of that, and still makes it more likely you hit Wiccan, because again, you know, you're getting that draw on turn 2 that now can be a Wiccan draw in essence. I think that's enough, man. I think this card's actually really good. All right, next up here we have Lin Lie Iron Fist. This is a 2/2 with on reveal, add the Sword of Fuxi to another location. And the Sword of Fuxi, as you can see, is also a 2/2 with ongoing. If Lin Lie Iron Fist is here, he has +7 power. So in total here, you're getting kind of 4 power at a base for 2 energy, and then you can also net another +7 if you somehow move either Lin Lie or the Sword of Fuxi to each other in essence. So that would be a total of 211 in total power. So this kind of has, you know, like Sam Wilson vibes a little bit, a 2-drop with a little token that you're trying to move around to each other. But when it hits, it is actually a pretty significant power output at 11 for 2. That is very efficient for a 2-drop. And I will say at a baseline, you know, it's not terrible either. 2/4, clearly not like super exciting, but it fills a couple spots, which could be beneficial. You know, if you're a deck that's running a Dazzler and you want to fill some spots. If you're a deck that cares about created cards, because you have like a Mockingbird or something, for instance, you know, this is a way to get a nice little thing. Sort of a Mr. Sinister at a base that, you know, goes in different locations as opposed to the same. But realistically, of course, you're going to want to run this more in a deck that has some move upside so that you can get these cards to land together. And that's where this all starts to like become an opportunity cost problem for me, where you say, hey, if I'm a move deck that's running a lot of move stuff, and I'm using my Madam Web and my Ghost Spiders and whatever else, right? This is not necessarily the biggest payoff, you know, compared to what the other things you could do in a move deck with big daggers, with big Human Torches. +7, that's a fixed value. You know, there's not like multiple iterations of this either. It's not like it's going off many, many times. So, you know, that becomes a bigger question for me. And it's like, you know, is this a Sam Wilson style card or not? I don't know. You think about like Mockingbird, you know, the great thing about Sam Wilson was that the shield was already there and in place. And When you think about it in some move packages with stuff like, say, you know, a Craven, maybe you're moving that multiple times and it moves on its own. It doesn't need the additional help. So it's like extra procs on Craven. It's a way to get a Miles Morales triggered. So it becomes both a payoff and a trigger in a way, because it's both the move and the buff. And although it doesn't get as big as this, it is a little bit more like self-sufficient and independent, whereas this needs help. And as soon as it starts getting that help, as soon as you use a Ghost Spider on this, or, you know, whatever it is, that's stealing from another opportunity to get bigger with move stuff. So is there some deck that kind of gets all of those things together to make this worth it? I don't know. And it's like, I think move decks already perhaps have better options than Lin Lie as well. So I just don't really know where this one fits. So I guess in total, I'm just like a little underwhelmed by this. The numbers kind of make sense. It's just a little too much work perhaps. And then I have those questions about deck fit that really leave me a little suspicious of this fella. So moving on here, we have a collectible skill, Dragon Breath. This is 4 energy. On reveal, give a 5 cost or higher character in your hand plus 3 power, and then afflict an enemy card at each location with -2 power. So assuming your opponent has cards at all 3 locations, which isn't necessarily a given on turn 4, I would say. And I think you really want to play this on turn 4 so that you can probably hit a 5 cost card on turn 5. I mean, theoretically, if you had 6 costs instead, you know, you could go on 5 and 6. But anyway, it's not a given, but I think pretty likely. I think usually you'd expect -6 there and +3, kind of making this 9 total power and output, which for 4 cost is good. I mean, that's slightly above rate. I will say sometimes spreading power that wide can be not as effective as kind of stacking power, because you might be focusing on 2 lanes, and then maybe the -2 in a 3rd spot isn't as relevant. Or, you know, it's like sometimes games are won by, you know, significant chunks, 4 or 5 power, and maybe the -2 didn't really matter anyway because you cleared it anyway because you just had such a big 5 drop that won by 5, and that -2 just wasn't really impactful. So, you know, I do think that hurts a little bit, but that also has upsides for things like Ajax or Abomination, whereas I do think this is actually a pretty nice affliction enabler because it is going across multiple bodies. So -3 discount on your Abomination, you know, extra buffs on your Ajax, maybe even extra buffs on your Ajax thanks to the 5 cost here, getting +3 power. But again, that actually kind of like overcommits you into one card that's like maybe really big and powerful. Whereas because you've debuffed across a broad range of targets, you might now want smaller cards that can increment above those smaller tweaks. Whereas if you play one guy, again, you might be kind of wasting some of your power distribution. So there is something there that just feels a little at odds with itself to me, not to mention that small risk that you miss a target. So I guess the question then just becomes like, you know, is this good enough an affliction deck? I don't really see it beyond that. I don't think the +3 buff is necessarily great on higher cost things either. A lot of the best like buff reward targets that we see most of the time, the Captain Carters we've already talked about, the Scarlet Spiders is my favorite example, right? They clearly don't line up here with Dragon Breath. It's gonna have to be something really big that cares about multiplying that extra power, which we don't see as often. Again, too often would just be an overcommitment anyway. So I'm a little intrigued for this with affliction decks, just because, you know, 3 hits is nice. But those decks certainly have other ways to go really wide with afflictions. Things like a Hazmat, for instance. Maybe it doesn't do quite as much of a power disruption, but certainly hits more targets. Or, you know, if you go into the High Evo package, you've got Cyclops is kind of doing the same sort of work as a Dragon Breath, but it has a body attached on top of that. So it's just kind of fallen in some cracks, basically. It doesn't really jump out at me in any particular direction as a super powerful card, but also not terrible. At the end of the day, it's potentially 9 power, and 9 power is fine. All right, moving on here to the Brand of Shou-Lao. This is a new 1 cost skill with on reveal. One of your other cards here steals 2 power from the character that costs the most in your opponent's hand, which really quite a mouthful, but it's certainly not that complicated. You're just going to have, you know, basically a 4-point swing here. If you play this next to one of your characters on board, they're going to get 2 extra power, and something in your opponent's hand is going to get -2 power, which I will say it's kind of nice in some cases to have those on-board buffs. We certainly have, you know, Sebastian Shaw's Scarlet Spiders, Captain Carters, let's keep going back to the same examples, that love getting buffs, even if they're on board. You know, some cards care more about hand buffs, stuff like, say, Brood, Mr. Sinister, some things want on board buffs. This is a nice way to follow up a card that's already on board and juice it up a little. The debuff in your opponent's hand, you don't expect that to be quite as relevant. You know, sometimes those big, heavy hitting cards are so big that 2 power doesn't really feel like a meaningful breakpoint against them. Or, you know, maybe the opponent just doesn't have to play it because they have other alternatives. They play a couple cheap cards instead. And if you're relying on this for like affliction synergies, for instance, you know, it's unlikely to pay off. You trust a card like Scorpion to pay off in a nice way because, you know, it's hitting so many targets. But when you're only hitting one target and it's a high cost one in particular, unlikely to do things like Discount and Abomination. So from the affliction side of it, probably not a reliable tool there. This one's probably going to be more about that onboard buff, or maybe just, you know, we have so many skills coming together. We could have some skills decks. I like the idea that, you know, you have some 1-cost skills popping off of like a Joaquin Torres, for instance. Get Merlin in there, a bunch of 1-cost skills. This could also be in a Shou-Lao deck. We saw earlier, you know, playing 2 cards per turn can be really important for Shou-Lao. Cheap skills are a great way to potentially, you know, weave in some plays like that. So I guess the question really is just like, is this better for you than Silver Sable? Because they basically do similar sorts of things. I think Silver Sable potentially a little more disruptive with her affliction just because it can hit like smaller things they want to weave in. And, you know, does the power shift on this one feel better to you than Silver Sable? Or like, do you want to be able to play Silver Sable on turn 1? Because you probably don't want to play Brand of Shou-Lao on turn 1. It's going to be a card that has to have a body down first to feel worth it. So it might just be kind of a deck fit and choice thing. But, you know, Silver Sable's a good card. Has certainly been played a lot. I think Brand of Shou-Lao could also be a good card. Doesn't have the bounce possibility of Silver Sable, I guess, either, which is one of her angles. But, you know, buffing things is powerful. So I think this card, once again, looks pretty fine. And then our final card here is the Majestic Wingbeat. This, by the way, is like the name of a skill. Perhaps this is an iconic ability for this character that I'm just unfamiliar with. You know, I obviously don't know much about Shou-Lao, who I think it looks like this is. But this does feel like a pretty generic skill. I like when the skills are a reference to like something super iconic in Marvel, you know. Even Brand of Shou-Lao, I don't actually know Brand of Shou-Lao, but it seems more iconic and significant to the character in the world and stuff. Whereas this is just a dragon flapping its wings. You know, that doesn't feel as cool or significant to me. So I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I just hope they don't do too many like super generic things like this, I guess is my takeaway. I want skills to feel like meaningful things. So anyway, this is a 1-mana skill again. On reveal, give the leftmost card in your hand +2 power. And then if it's 5 cost or higher, -1 cost 2. So that's pretty nice, right? Like getting a big card discounted can be really good. Again, I don't know how meaningful the +2 power is really going to feel. It's probably just kind of free. I think you care more about the discount here in particular. We do know like Agatha decks are one way to get a really reliable high cost thing on the leftmost side of your deck. I don't think this is going to be a better way to enable Agatha though than like what we've already got. I don't think, you know, better than Red Shift, Lady Sif, etc. All the classic Agatha hits, Zombie Luke Cage, I guess too. So I don't really think that's an angle for this. So it's like, does this make its way into just like a big stuff deck where you're just trying to cheat out a guy early? I also kind of feel like ramp is a more reliable way to do that. That's more beneficial to you very often. So I don't know. It just seems like, is this really going to be worth it? And then it's like, if it's not a 5 cost or higher card, I really don't like this very much. I guess, you know, a hand buff deck with all the Broods and Mr. Sinisters and Captain Carters and Shaws could maybe weave this in again. I still think a little bit about Joaquin Torres as well, but I do think you really want that 5 cost or higher to make this feel great. So this one just feels like it's going to be a tough solve for decks to want to run this. I'm trying to think about getting all this to work together, and it's iffy. And the decks that have the big stuff often don't really want to run 1-cost skills because they want to run a high density of big stuff. So yeah, this one just feels a little questionable to me. So all that said, that's all of our cards. Now I would like to rank these from the cards I think are going to be the best to the worst. The number 1 card is Fin Fang Foom. My number 2 card is Shang-Chi, Master of the Rings, purely because it's going to be perfect for Wiccan decks. Number 3 is Shou-Lao the Undying. Number 4 is Dragon Lord. Number 5 is Lockheed. Number 6 is Dragon of the Moon. Number 7 is Brand of Shou-Lao. Number 8 is Lin Lie Iron Fist. Number 9 is Dragon Breath. And number 10 is Majestic Wingbeat. And yeah, no, I think this is a pretty sick month. I mean, I'm a sucker for dragons, right? Like some of the Marvel seasons are not especially interesting to me, like thematically. Don't have enough like big awesome stuff. I love like fantasy too, right? So this is kind of bridging. This almost feels like a Hearthstone season in Marvel Snap. So it's nice to see that thematic merging there. It feels really cool to me. Also, just like some really big awesome cards and big numbers. Always a sucker for that stuff. So yeah, pretty excited to see some 30 plus power Fin Fang Fooms landing. That's going to be super fun. But I think some good disruptive cards. We got some teas of like even cost decks, maybe some 2-card play decks, some 1-drop decks, some big decks, Wiccan decks. Like a little nice mix of everything here is possible. So anyway, share your thoughts on all these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and I guess I will see you around.